I went back to get my clock, because when I get too excited about this, I forget about everything. Actually, I was so excited about talking today that when I woke up, I took a shower. I was looking at my paper. I was ready, and it's 5 to 9. I want to have time to eat breakfast. I ran out of the room, and I said, isn't it a bit dark? I'll go downstairs to the lobby, and it was completely empty. And I was, what's going on? What time is it? It's 1 a.m. in the morning. So I realized I was way too enthusiastic, so I had to go back to sleep. So this is a way in which I depict how enthused I was of speaking here with you. So first of all, I would like to thank Adriana Matalonga, Miguel Valencia, and all of the team. I don't know everyone, but they've done a wonderful work. We know, because of our own personal experience, that organizing an event like this is quite a sacrifice. There are many risks you have to run, because you are doing initiatives that have never been done. You don't know how they'll be received. Will you have the money? Will people care? Will you be able to pay the food? And that is a gift that is given today to the degrowth community, the critical community. And in this way, we are receiving the gift. And on behalf of the community, I want to thank you. And I also believe that the list could be very long. We could also thank, and sometimes I like to say this, the people who clean the room, and the people who cater the breakfast, people who are preparing lunch, because there are many people who do many different tasks to allow us to live and reproduce ourselves and be here and speak about the things that we speak about. At the end of the day, degrowth emphasizes the need of making invisible things visible. And that is something that we should learn from the feminists. But I'll get there on time. Yesterday morning, unfortunately, I was not here, but there was a meeting of the alliance between feminism and degrowth, which is so important. And if somebody cares about this matter, you could talk to Miriam Declerc, who would be more than willing to speak about this. It's an initiative that is international and it's growing. Anyway, I came to this conference rather to listen, to learn, and just to talk a little. And obviously, as an Italian guy, I loved speaking, so I had no problem with that. Coming here and trying to get ready to share some ideas, I was thinking over and over again about a question, and the question was, it is very simple. What do we want? Or in a simpler way, you could say, why? Why are we here? Why am I here? So the answer is individual, obviously. My answer is that I love meeting people. I want to learn. I've never visited Mexico. There are many personal reasons for me to be here, but from a political viewpoint, what do I want to get? And I guess that it can be expressed through the words of some feminists that propose the approach of sustainability of life. Maria Pérez Orozco, she asks two very simple and complex questions at the same time. She says, first, what is a life worth living? How do you sustain it? And the answer, once again, it's individual, but it could be collective. Living living well-being, what do we mean by that? So it is important for us to have clarity about the things we want to achieve, so that first of all we can assess the things that we have done, but also so that we can construct strategies into the future, because it would be very easy for us to lose the horizon, not only to lose the horizon, but to end up doing worse. We don't want degrowth to be another fake idea like sustainable development, that we are promising something that is impossible to achieve. So it is important for us to be realistic. As Andre Gors has said, degrowth is an exercise in realism. What I can share with you is the experience that I've had, so it's partial, it's personal, it's biased. Somebody who's lived the debate of degrowth in Europe, first in Italy and then in Barcelona, living inside the academia and in the debate that is happening in English. So for us, degrowth has been a slogan which to disturb, provoke, horizon concept in the academia and social movements. We could speak about how we define growth. The simplest way is to say that we want to live well, not better, well, with less. We've also said that it is a political project, that it does have an emphasis in the reduction of consumption and therefore reducing our flows and energy and materials, and that we want this process to be fair and democratic. So it emphasizes the social component, not only the ecological one. Degrowth is trying to bring together both spheres. So the final objective is not to degrowth for the sake of it, but also to have the social, environmental, and well-being aspects considered. And degrowth, it cannot be taken literally. We don't want to reduce the GDP as an indicator, but using it as an indicator of progress is what's wrong, because if you do that, if it goes up or down, makes no sense. Whatever policies we have that can affect the GDP is something that could be acceptable. Sophia mentioned the book, and I highly recommend you buy it as soon as you find it. The Latin American version of Degrowth, coordinated by Mario Perez and Sofia Avila, is quite relevant. And in here we emphasize that degrowth doesn't only mean less, because if that was the case, European authority policies would mean that less money, less resources. No, we are emphasizing that we want a different type of society. We want different type of social relationships. Gender relations are different. We want to use our time in a different way. Do we want to spend 2 hours in a car to get to a job that I don't like? To earn a wage as we know it nowadays? Do we want to keep living in a society that is like that? We want to have a society that's smaller, different. So something that usually appears in Europe when we speak of degrowth in public presentations, the top 5 questions include what happens with the southern countries, the underdeveloped, the developing nations, so wrongly called. There are different answers that have been given to that. The first one that we have given, and I believe that I also used to believe that, I regret it, you grow up, was that the countries of the north had to degrow so that they could leave room for the southern nations to grow. And that meant in the use of natural resources. One of the things that was brought to the table was whether the countries of the north, when they degrow, will they reduce their imports of the raw materials from the south, and what will happen to the economies of the south? Those are important questions, but it's more complex than that. Another answer that we've given to this question is it true that in the south nations there's a middle class, an upper middle class that is quite extended, and degrowth only means doing something to those middle classes in Mexico City, in Buenos Aires, some other places? Another answer that we've given, what I wanted to say is that when we hear there are problems of poverty, inequality, sustainability, they can only be solved if there's more growth. It doesn't work that way in the rich countries, but it will work in the poor countries. Now, the question is complex. I've spent plenty of time in India, and I remember that the progressive debates are always around how growth should be green and inclusive. And this would admit how the current growth is not green or inclusive. So at the end of the day, or as far as I've gone with this reflection, is that in this debate of what will happen in the South, the best way, even if it's obvious, has not always been the most common answer. We should be asking the people of the South, for instance. Maristela Pampa, in her book, The Latin American Debates, she sets a frame. of the debates, and we should be asking humbly, do we want to end up reproducing a colonial project? So we have to emphasize that there has not been an interest from the side of degrowth for that to happen. People who've been working in Europe, even though it is true, and for instance, I have tried to make an effort so that our books are published in different Latin American countries, because I believe that in that vocabulary that we have attempted to create to clarify certain terms of the debate, I believe that those terms and those debates, they are relevant for Latin American nations and Southern nations. I personally believe that we should question growth as the core of public policies and as the panacea to solve all of the social problems. But I also believe that we should ask further, and it is important for us to be here and hear the answers and the debates that we'll be listening to the next 3 days. Having said this, regarding the question of what do we want to do, if we try to clarify that question, as I said before, we could do an assessment of what is it that we have done in the last few years, and this is what I attempt to do now. I'll try to share the brief experience we've had in Europe and try and see our achievements and the things that are left for us to achieve, and things that perhaps we'd like to work on together. The story of degrowth comes from far away, very far away. But to simplify, we could say that starting in the 70s, there was an encounter between two very important debates that were happening. One that had to do with political ecology, and that all environmental issues were also a situation of power struggles and social struggles. And Degrowth was one of the main pioneers in the area, and Degrowth asked in 1972 in a debate in Paris with Ricardo Morán and others, he asked, do we accept the idea that for sustainability we need to stop economic growth, and if that is the case, that society would be a capitalistic society or not? This is a question that it is still very current. And because of political ecology, there are great representatives in Europe and in Mexico and in Latin America. Declerc, Martinez Alier, many of those personalities are here. Victor Toledo, who's not here, but it's close. People who have done a lot of work along those lines. So this school of thought has found another line, and that is, to simplify, one that is critiquing development. Here in Mexico, we should speak about Ivan Illich, but there are many people who go behind them, who have been inspired by him. Ivan Illich has always been a great inspiration in Italy, in Europe, in the debates of degrowth. And then there was the Dictionary of Development, Maristeles Pampas, Arturo Escobar, Alberto Acosta, Juan Gustavo Esteva. They all participated, people who've done a lot of work in this line. So the meeting of those two lines is what has promoted the growth, but it wasn't until the 70s when Serratus, it was not him, it was the ground roots activists that wanted to question the lie of degrowth and sustainable development, and so they started using degrowth in the year 2000. Here there are two stages that have taken place during the last 20 years. The first one, in which whatever was achieved in degrowth was to enter into public debate and introduce certain ideas in the public debate, very simple ideas. Infinite growth in a finite planet is not possible. GDP as an indicator of progress is not one. And the feminists who have been saying this for a long time, the GDP does not include care labor because they are not monetized. And then the idea of the limits of technology, the idea that technology cannot fix all of the problems that we have. In all of the currents of ecological modernization, eco-modernism, they've all mentioned it. So the idea that resources are limited and that there are things that are called the peaks of oil have to be included, those were the elements that we have added to the debate. There were some prime ministers in Europe, like Sarkozy, the French president, had to say that he was against degrowth. That was good news because it meant that from a political perspective, we are becoming relevant. Now, within social movements, I believe that degrowth was also gaining terrain as a common horizon. I could work with migrants or renewable energies or solidary economics, but I saw that we needed the resistance, the critique. They were not enough, but rather that we needed to bring to the table the things that we did want. We wanted to bring our alternative. Degrowth could be one amongst others. Joseph Stiglitz, for instance, for people who come from the anti-globalization movement like myself, he wrote in the New York Times not long ago that degrowth was marginalized within the political left, but it was not so marginal for us to be ignoring it, and that's good news. Or Pope Francis, during his encyclica, he didn't write it, but somebody talented wrote it, and he copied the theology of liberation, mentioning in his special critique of development, he made references to environmental conflicts and environmental justice, and there was a small reference that me and my mom liked. There was a reference to degrowth. So this is a signal of how degrowth is being presented in political debates. And in Barcelona University, the Environmental Institute, some colleagues did a survey in Spain, a phone survey to ask people about their opinion on the relationships between economic growth and sustainability. So it is not to wonder that 60% of the population that were surveyed believe that economic growth and sustainability can live along together. That is the idea of great growth, and that is something that we're trying to question. But the most interesting question is that 35% of the people who answer the questions do agree with us that they are not compatible. Economic growth is not enough for us to achieve sustainability. I don't believe that this is something that came from the degrowth debate, not entirely. It has to do with common sense. And I guess the challenge here is to convince the remaining 60% of the population that that's not possible. And then there's another very small percentage of people who are declaring themselves against economic growth, or rather supporting economic growth regardless of the ecological cost. But that was a small percentage. That's good news for us. So there's still much to be done, but we're moving forward. During the last 10 years, because that was the first stage, we were able to enter the public debate. There's a second stage of consolidation, especially in the debates in English, because that's what is more abundant for me. So our idea was to take degrowth to the International Academy. We did this, or the academia, sorry. We did this to 2-year conferences in Paris. That's where we started. We had the same number of people back then, 150. People said degrowth is not something that couldn't be said because the word didn't exist. It's now been accepted after 10 years. And the conferences have always had an objective not only to bring people from the academia together, but also to bring other actors, people who do practical things, activists, people who are on the front lines, with people from the academia and the general public so that they can exchange experiences. The conferences have been very successful. They've had great participation. For instance, the Leipzig in Germany had 3,000 people attendance, and this year we had 3. One in Malmö, Sweden. This one, the first one in North-South relationships, another one in the European Parliament that will be taking place in 2 weeks' time. That's another proof of how it's been institutionalized. The movement is becoming institutional. It is also part of the work of the academia. There are many, 200 papers that have been published in magazines, books, and there's a series of books by a publishing house. We've had summer classes in Germany, Italy, Barcelona. In Barcelona, they've taken place for 8 years, and now we're finding students of the summer schools who have gone around the world. I see somebody from here in the audience, and there's also great interest. And because of this, we had decided to create a master's degree program on degrowth and environmental politics, and we will have our first generation starting in October. Mr. Blanc and other people who work in education Degrowth and others will be included. There's a book of a German NGO that's called Fermindu, and it includes materials for teaching school children on degrowth, and we have the intention of introducing those materials, translate them into Spanish. So many things have taken place. That's good news. I believe that that's what I at least expected 10 or 15 years ago. We did it and we went beyond. However, we do need now that, according to the needs, there's still plenty to be done. So it is important for us to ask the question, what are our priorities? What are our strategies? Where do we want to invest our strength? And that is important for us to discuss politically. An agenda that does not only include research, but also actions, specific actions, political lobbying in all the sense of the word. And to conclude, because I believe that I don't have much time left, I would like to wrap up by saying, very humbly, and speak about some of the challenges I see into the future. In the degrowth movement, there is a challenge within, at least in Europe, to define ourselves in the conferences, because there's plenty of debate of who are we. We are a social movement. Are we not? And I believe that we're mapping the groups of degrowth in Europe and around the world. We have mapped more than 100 of them. The intention is to strengthen the network. There's a group of researchers, of educators and activists, people who are doing dissemination. So the idea is to consolidate the network, the movement. And then there's another challenge, a challenge that is an exterior one. Let's see if you agree with me. We need to emphasize the construction of alliances. I've mentioned some. Feminism is very important, and some people might say the matter is not to strengthen an alliance between feminism and degrowth, but rather to make certain that feminisms are core within degrowth. I agree with that. But I believe we still have a lot of learn. As a man, I don't fully understand the experience because I've not lived it. Discrimination, oppression, I look at it from the perspective of a man, not of a woman. I have my own oppression, and I want to emancipate myself from it, but I still have a lot to learn. So I guess we need to approach feminists in a humble way to try and learn and see how we can make this central. There's another core alliance that also makes a lot of sense in Mexico and Latin America, and that is with the justice movements. In Barcelona, it's a great concern for us. We have atlas of environmental conflicts with more than 2,000 conflicts. Hopefully people can join us, but this is not an exercise that is called of only collecting for the historical perspective, but rather it has to be a live exercise for us to see the alliances that can be constructed between the conflicts, people who fight against the same type of extraction or mining, and people who fight against the pollution of water, waste management and all. So how do we construct along with them? In what is the proposal that is proposed in their own land? And then there are many others that don't have the time to expand on. It'll be debated on Thursday on a global conference of alternatives. It'll be an exercise of choosing some of the alternatives to development, be them conceptual, philosophical, or practical, and of action. In the book that has been edited with Alberto Costa, Francisco Attari, Ariel Seguero, Alberto Escobar. It is a small, humble exercise. It won't be exhaustive, but the idea is to start the conversation. This is the debate that we want to bring center stage. But the first question, once again, on the table, is what do we want to do? How are we going to join the different alternatives, and what are the similarities, what are the differences? And I would emphasize on the differences because I want to learn from other experiences and from other projects. And what are we going to do with the worlds or the projects that we don't like? How are we going to agree to disagree, to be different from them? What are we going to do with them without failing our own criteria and principles, and perhaps attempting and this is a question that I also have, we're going to need to have universal principles and criteria to be able to distinguish ourselves from other projects and other worlds that we don't like and that we don't want to share. Because our proposal is one of a pluriverse, as the Zapatistas say. We want a world where many worlds can fit in. So that's where I end. A very important element in this process is the relevance of not being afraid, to be able to open the imagination up. Occupying Spain would say, we don't have a job, we have no future, and therefore we have no fear.